Hi, with the latest release of Docker Desktop, we have a new feature which allows us to inspect, build, troubleshoot errors and optimize build speeds. This is called as the builds view and I'm super excited about this. Let's see how we can use this feature to our advantage. To use this feature, you need to have the 4.26.1 version of Docker Desktop, and you can see here in the release notes or notifications that it now supports this build view in GA. It was in preview for a while. If we go back to the Docker Desktop, we will see that there is a new view available, or there is a new option available here on the left which says builds, along with the other options like containers, images, volumes. When we click on builds, we get the view of all the builds that have happened or the recent builds that have taken place, and we get the status of completed builds along with the name of the build, which builder was used, what is the status of that build, how much duration it took, and when was this created. We can also filter this by showing only my view or the builds that I have triggered. Like I can say show only my builds, but since this is my personal computer and all the builds are triggered by me, we won't see any change in this particular case. But if you are using Docker Desktop to trigger multiple builds for your team, you can then filter this for your own view. And then at the top, we also see if there is any active build. So let's first see how do we make use of this information. I think this is a very handy feature. I would have loved to have this feature right from the beginning of Docker. This gives me a lot of information about the build related activities. Let's look at one of the completed build, which took about 4 minutes and it was completed yesterday. This is about the Tech Talk consumer. And in the details section, we find these 4 tabs, including the info, source, logs, and the history. In the info section, we can find the build timings. What is the real time it took to complete the build? What is the accumulated time? This is the time it took for all the builds. And then if there was any cache used or everything was pulled and everything was created fresh. It also shows us if there was any parallel steps done during the build execution. So I think this is quite handy in terms of identifying which stages of the build are taking how much amount of time, like local file transfer, the image pulls, the total number of executions in terms of the steps, and also the file operations and the results. So having this visual representation is a very handy feature in my opinion. We can also filter this by specific platform, and earlier on this channel I showed how to create multi-platform container images. If we have multiple images targeting multiple platforms, or if we have an image which targets multiple platforms for a project, we can then filter it out to a particular platform. By default, we will be showing all the platforms, or we will see the results for all the platforms. And then we have additional information in terms of dependencies, configuration, and the build results. Next thing is source, which I personally find very, very useful, because if we are going through different iterations of creating Docker images and we make changes to our Docker file, this source will tell us what was the exact Docker file version that was used to create this particular build, or that was used during this build. What is the version of Docker file which was used to execute this particular build. We also get the logs. So this is like running the Docker logs command to see the different stages of build execution. And this is similar to what we will see on the terminal. Whatever output we get when we run the Docker build command, we will see that output here in the logs. And the best part which I like about whole of these builds feature is the history. This shows us what is the history of this particular build. Now, if we look at specifically the Tech Talks consumer build, this project or this particular Docker file which I've been using, It has had 12 builds, and we can see how much time it took for each of the build. And it also shows us like the build steps, how many steps were cached, how much duration it took. And from this graph we can see that the first three builds, they were completed pretty fast, and then there is this one build here which took almost close to 3 minutes. And here we would be able to identify some of the reasons why it took longer than the actual or longer than before. We can then drill down into the specific build, and again, if I want to look at this particular build which took 3 minutes and 22 seconds, I can go and look at that information, specifically that particular build. So in my personal opinion, I find the history very useful to identify what is the trend in terms of the build progress and how the build has been progressing, how much time individual builds have been taking. So if I'm trying to optimize my build time by making things like using the cache mount feature, if you look at this build 9, it says that there were 8 steps which were cached. And again, on this channel previously I've done a video to show how to use this caching feature to optimize the build times. In this case, I can see that if I use the caching or mount cache, it reduces the time to 2.4 seconds for a build which does not cache, and it takes about 4 minutes and 40 seconds. So it's a huge improvement in this case in terms of productivity for developer, when the time goes from almost 5 minutes to less than 2 seconds or less than 3 seconds. You can imagine these kind of things which you can visualize and which you can track to see how the builds are getting impacted when you make some changes to your Docker file and any settings that are related to the Docker. Now let's go back and see how do we trigger this. I'm going to use the BuildX feature to create a multi-platform Docker build here, or to generate 2 versions of the image. I had again demonstrated this in one of the earlier videos, how to use the BuildX and the platforms flag to generate the multiple versions of the image. So when the build is triggered here, it shows the Docker build output on the terminal as usual. If we go back into the Docker Desktop UI and we head over to the builds, now we can see that under the running builds or active builds, we have the TechTalks consumer here. It shows which builder is being used and how many steps are currently executing or how many steps are there. There are total 27 steps involved in this particular build, and we are currently running the step 20. I can go and look at the real-time progress of this. I can look at the real-time log. This is exactly same as what we see on the terminal. And then it again goes back to the other things like the source history and the info. While this is building, we don't have all the information, but it is a real-time input that we get in terms of which are the builds which are running actively. Now the question comes is, what happens if we use some of the features of Docker Desktop like Docker Compose, and we run Docker Compose to build our multiple images in parallel. Let's see what happens when we run multiple builds together. One way to do that is to use Docker Compose, which has got multiple services. Now I'm going to use this Docker Compose file for my Cloud Native Ninja project, which consists of the TechTalks producer and TechTalks consumer, 2 services, and I'm going to try and build them parallelly. Now when I trigger the Docker Compose command and when I run the build, we can see that there are 2 builds trigger in parallel, and similar to what we saw when we run a single Docker build command, by triggering the Docker Compose, which runs multiple Docker builds in parallel, we can see the status of both these builds together. I hope that you found this useful to see how Docker builds is helping developers to improve their developer experience in terms of identifying what are the problems with Docker builds and what are the optimizations that can be done. Thanks for watching this video. If you find this useful, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel and subscribe to the notifications so that you get to know when a new video is published. Also, let me know in the comments what you would like to see future on this particular channel. Thanks for watching this video.